one thing that you were mentioning was this, and I mentioned it in one of my previous episodes, was this idea of helping somebody learn progressively. You're starting with something that's simple and not overly complex, but over time you're adding a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And it's this idea of this rubber band that's getting wider and wider, right? It's the zone of proximal development. And that, I'm sure this won't be the last episode that I mention that in, because I think it's important. And I think it's something that also is missing from our industry, where how many times have you had someone try to teach you something and instantly they're dropping in terminology and syntax that you've never heard of? And that goes like, I mean, I remember one of my first sessions ever working with somebody, it was like, we were already talking about RxJS.
Right.
And I appreciate what value was trying to be taught there. But for somebody who's never heard of Angular and this is the first time you've ever learning it, like there needs to be a process of complexity and when new topics are brought in and when you're teaching something. So what are you watching for? Like you have this 30 and 30, but Lukas, what if somebody goes through day 8, project 8? Do you still make them move on to project 9 if it's day 9, or how would you handle that? Like, what if it's just not sinking in for them yet, this concept on day 8 or something? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So this is, I'm going to introduce kind of another kind of a meta concept that I think is really important. And so I know we're talking about learning, but at the same time, I think this illustrates, I think, a really important kind of a thing that it took me 20 years to realize.
Okay.
When we program, we're doing 4 things and that's it. Like we're doing 4 things that we actually, as small children, we already understand. So when you're programming, and Brooke, if you've heard me talk about this, just nod your head and pretend like it's the first time, but it's nouns, verbs, conditions, and iterators.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so we understand that, small children, that there's things in the world, there's objects that have characteristics, that have values, that makes things unique. And so, like, go get me the ball, go get me the blue ball. Like, to understand, like, this is the ball, this is the block, this is a baba, whatever, is that we understand that there's objects and there's characteristics about them that makes it unique. And at a very small age, we are wired for pattern recognition. We understand as well that you can do things to these objects and the objects themselves can do things. And so this is your verbs, and as well as conditions. This is pretty self-explanatory. Can I have dessert? Well, if you ate your dinner, then you can have your dessert. Or shall I stay or shall I go? If I go, there will be trouble. If I stay, there will be double. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And then you have iterators, which is really just loops that you're performing some action on every item within a collection. And so just imagine we had 3 trays of donuts sitting on a table. We had a red tray, a green tray, and a blue tray. And I said to a 5-year-old kid, hey, go to that blue tray and get me all of the sprinkled donuts on that tray and bring it back to me. I've said nothing mysterious, to them. There's nothing confusing about it. They understand I'm going to the blue tray. I'm going to get the sprinkled donuts and I'm going to bring them back. But you can express that in programming. And so you realize that there's more than one tray. So we have a collection of trays, red, green, blue. And so what you're doing is you're iterating mentally, if you realize it or not, is like, is this the blue tray? No, it's the red tray. It's the green tray. Okay, this is the blue tray. So it's true. So now this is, the tray I want. And then you have a collection of donuts. You're basically filtering donuts.filter. Sprinkle is true. And you're creating a subarray of just the sprinkled donuts. And then it's child.fetch sprinkled donuts. And which is, by the way, the greatest function in the world. It's my all-time favorite. Yeah. And when I realized this, And so I'm like, this can't be true. And I went and I started looking at all of, the NGRX, like the most complex Angular app I'd ever written. I realized, yep, it's nouns, verbs, conditions, and iterators, in the sense of you have nouns, which are just data structures or objects. You have verbs, which is just methods and functions. Conditions are if else or switch. And you have iterators, which is, map, filter, for each. And when I teach this in a workshop, I start by talking about this, and we start building out some basic objects, and we build on it. And people are like, oh my gosh, like, what are we doing here? I thought this was supposed to be an enterprise patterns class or something.
Yeah.
And I preface this with like, hey, we're doing some Mr. Miyagi, like wax on, wax off stuff. So like, just hang tight.
Yeah.
And by the time we're finished, they realize that I've actually went through the back door and taught them how to basically write Redux. And all of a sudden they're like, wait, like, we just wrote Redux, which is one of the most important state management patterns, I think, in front-end development, in my opinion. And you realize that you're taking a hard thing and you're breaking it down into first principles, which is, again, nouns, verbs, conditions, and iterators. I will say, was coincidentally, when I arrived at this conclusion, Samin Nosrat wrote this book called Salt, Fat, Heat, and Acid, which there's also a Netflix show, which is pretty good. And she realized, she's like, if you understand salt, fat, heat, and acid, like truly understand it, you can cook anything. And I would say that if you truly understand nouns, verbs, conditions, and iterators, you can program, and you can actually establish a framework for thinking about how to put code together.
Yeah.
What I realized is that I basically came full circle, and I'm like, this is the stuff that I learned in my very first programming book.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it just was like, this is it. Like, this is everything I'm doing is this. And so I think another very important principle that I would say is we do not need necessarily to learn new things, but rather we need to have a deeper understanding of the things that we already know.
Right.
And that's where I think people get into weeds with programming, is when we program, we're trying to describe the world around us. We're modeling really things that either physically or conceptually happen, but we understand them because they're part of our reality. And the reason why programming is hard is not because programming is hard, it's because the world that we live in is complicated. And as a result, I think people, when they struggle with programming, is they haven't stopped and actually developed I would say a proper, I think, understanding and way of thinking about the world around them. And as a result, what they're trying to express in code is confusing because their understanding of the world around them is confused. I've taken vocal lessons for many years, and what I realized is that singing is not about what comes out of your mouth. It's actually what you hear. And so the greatest lesson my vocal coach ever taught me is not how to sing, but how to listen. Drawing is not about what your hands are doing. It's what your eyes are doing.
Yeah.
It's actually, it's sharpening and calibrating your device of measurement, your eyes, your ears, to properly discern what's actually happening. Does this sound on key? Am I drawing this right? Is it to the right proportions? Or when you program, like, am I actually representing this domain properly? And then when you can perceive that, then, if you're singing off pitch, like, I know immediately, like, that was sharp, that was flat. And then I can kind of course correct because I'm providing basically a self-reinforcing feedback loop within myself, where I'm drawing and I'm like, that doesn't look right. And then I can kind of fix it on the fly. And really good engineers, like senior engineers, they don't even, I would say, typically they don't even think about like syntax and, these, like, the lower level implementation details. Is they just think about programming in these broad shapes, and they're just constantly like refining it, through all these micro iterations, because they're trusting their ability to perceive, am I arriving at the right place? And so I will say, even with RxJS, I love RxJS. It's amazing, but I didn't truly understand it till it was explained to me by John Lindquist, who is the co-founder of Egghead.io
Right.
and one of the most amazing teachers I've ever met. And he kind of put me on the spot, and he's like, do you understand, RxJS? I'm like, yeah, totally. Like, and I'm thinking, like, I can call HTTP and I have an observable, like, I'm good. And he's like, great, build a stopwatch using observable streams. And I'm like, what? Like, and I was lost. And by working with him, I realized the reason why people struggle with RxJS is because they don't understand the underlying observable stream. And what they don't really understand is that because they're used to thinking about the world in this input output paradigm of that I provide something, I'm providing input, I get output, which is a pull-based paradigm, is that they haven't shifted their underlying paradigm of how they think about code to observable streams, which the key to understanding RxJS is understanding observable streams, which is predicated on understanding that you're no longer in an input output world, but you're in an output input world. In other words, things are happening. Like the hose has been turned on. You simply need to figure out where you want to put that hose. And, so if you're in the backyard, somebody turns on the hose, well, where are you going to put it? Like what, are you filling up the pool? Are you spraying the kids? Are you watering the flowers? That's up to you. And that's the point of your RxJS operators, is where am I putting this and what form do I want it to be when it gets there? But I can literally reduce, I think, the major confusion about RxJS and observables to a single graphic, which is once you stop thinking about this in terms of input, I provide input, I get output, and instead output's happening, I need to figure out where I want to put it or how I want to input it into my app. That's when that fundamental shift, all of a sudden now everything else starts to make sense. And so to that end, just to kind of tie this thought down, is if somebody gets stuck or they're having a problem, more often than not, it's not that they need to go acquire some additional information, is that you need to slow down and really stop and think about what assumptions are you making about the problem, and then revisiting that. Now, in regards to the 30 by 30, I'm very, very intentional about having the delta for one app to the next. So for one day to the next is very, very small. Like you are, and in fact, it's important for me that you are the apps themselves. It's a very gradual, incremental change where you might introduce one thing of like, I did template driven forms today. I'm doing the same exact app, but I'm doing reactive forms, or I'm adding in, let's say like sub route, like route params, or like you're adding in one thing that you're just changing that context slightly. And so even then, if there's this huge leap where somebody's like, I totally did day 7 and I'm stuck on day 8, it's like, well, you're trying to do something that's either indicated you didn't really understand what was happening up to day 7,
right?
Or you're trying to do too much. And that's where I would the first thing I'd ask is, what did you do yesterday? What are you trying to do now? And possibly reducing that scope, where it's like, could you do day 7 again? And the answer is ideally yes. And it's like, okay, well, what's the next thing you could do, to improve upon this? And so I would say in terms of learning as a whole, is eventually you realize that mastery is reductive and everything gets reduced to first principles. And this is where I think you have to get very comfortable being really confused for a while as a programmer.
Right.
I still get confused, but when you have the right mental models and you can fall back on good first principles, your ability to navigate these kind of murky waters suddenly become not scary at all. And you're able to kind of reason about it.
Yeah. It reminds me of a couple of things. Like John Papa gave a lightning talk at ng-conf that was all about simplifying, just simplify. And he wasn't at all trying to knock, some of the more complex ways that Angular handles things, but I think he was saying exactly what you're saying, is just simplify sometimes, because there's no need to get overly complex, and it
Right.
just confuses you, it confuses people coming in after you. So keeping things simple, I think, is really important. But
Right.
also what you're describing is, and it goes back a little bit to what we were saying before, of you're giving people ideas and concepts that they're already familiar with, so that
Yep.
they can understand programming. It's like you said,
Yep.
it's going back to the world around you. And if you don't truly understand the world around you, then how can you make sense of this new code and this new syntax? So
Yep.
finding a way to really give it a context that you do understand. And that's where I think, as mentors, as teachers, it's really important to come up with good analogies, good
Mhm.
comparisons, things
Yep.
like that, to help people to really relate to what they're learning.
Yep.
Do you have a suggestion for how people can do that? Because I think it is important. And again, I think it's something that's really missing from teaching and mentoring, is helping people to understand, not just by spewing information at them. Here's this new concept. Why aren't you getting it? This is so easy. Well, no, it's not easy.
Right.
It's really not. Please stop saying that it's easy or simple,
Right.
or that they should be able to do it in 2 minutes. But what are, like, do you have recommendations for really pulling in? It's called schema, by the way, someone's schema, their previous knowledge, their previous exposure to ideas,
Right.
tapping into their interests and bringing it into your mentoring.
Yeah. I would say, first and foremost, I think great teachers and leaders are deeply empathetic people. You absolutely, you have to just really care and be willing to really go to where somebody is, and realizing that, everything is relative. And one of my favorite lines from Sneakers, referring back to the Haggard movie, is that,
Nice.
perception is reality. Is that, when you're dealing with a customer, it's not about how you perceive the situation, it's how they perceive the situation. And you may be like, I completely disagree with you, but I at least have to acknowledge that this is how you see the situation. As a result, that's the reality in which I have to address the situation. I have to communicate. And dealing with, I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, and just even biologically, like, it's really crazy how schools will ask like a 17-year-old kid, like, what do you want to do with your life? And I'm thinking, like, their prefrontal cortex is not even developed. Like, they're not even capable of projecting themselves into the future in any meaningful way. Like, they have no way of knowing. That's a ludicrous question.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to really stop and really be empathetic. And I make this mistake, is that for now, programming is almost effortless. And I sometimes forget that I spent 10 years, grinding my teeth out, trying to learn how to do this and making every possible mistake. And that it's unfair for me not to accommodate that similar process of,
Yeah.
like, somebody is learning how to see the world in a totally different way. And I would say that a core fundamental tenet of being a mentor or mentoring somebody or being even a leader or a manager is that you have to understand that meaningful change cannot happen outside of psychological safety. If somebody is not psychologically safe, like, you might see some kind of a behavior change, but it's under duress. And once they're out of that situation, their vagus nerve kind of calms down, is that they're going to revert back to previous behaviors. Is that if you truly want to create meaningful and positive behavior change, is you have to first and foremost create psychological safety.
Yeah.
And so this comes down to really earning somebody's trust and their confidence. If somebody doesn't trust me, like, I can't help them. Is that I have to be a friend first. I have to, they have to respect me and understand that I am ultimately serving their best interest.
Yeah.
And so I would say, as with anything, really operating from a place of empathy and, a high degree of integrity so that people feel safe. This actually kind of creates an interesting segue of sorts, is that, I work at Venmo, and I spend a lot of time dealing with like developer growth. And so I spend a lot of time mentoring other people within the organization. And I have probably one of the greatest managers I've ever had in my life. His name is Casey Brown. And I realized that I've never had to ask him for permission to do anything. Is that I can go to him and say, I would like to do this thing. And he will ask me questions. He doesn't tell me what to do. He can offer suggestions, but he challenges me to articulate and self-organize into some desired outcome. What that does is that anything that I do, even if it's something that he wants me to do, it's a co-created outcome.
Nice.
And this is really, really important, is that you simply cannot say, I want you to do this or else. You have to say, what is it? What's the outcome that we want? Or what's the outcome that you want? And when you can get people to emotionally and psychologically buy in and take ownership into the outcome,
yeah,
then you no longer have to coerce them. As a simple example is, if I gave you $1 million to write 30 apps in 30 days, like how hard would you have to motivate yourself to do that? Like if you knew, like it would be like, I'd be done in 3 days.
Right.
Is that when people are emotionally connected and committed to an outcome, even with small children, my kids, like, I got to beg them and plead them to, do their cursive handwriting. But if they start playing Minecraft or Legos, I won't see them for 7 hours.
Right.
Because like, that's where they are. And so when I program, or I'm teaching my kids how to program, is that I have to, by simply understanding where they are and what they're interested in and framing that, I have no problem teaching them how to program Minecraft.
Right.
And teaching them how to do these things. And so when I talk to somebody, I really like to find out what are their interests, and having that, like, what are you into? Like gardening, cooking. And then I will automatically kind of change or shift my examples and my metaphors to resonate with something that they already know, so that they can anchor it in. And so this is where I think a mistake that even organizations try to make is they try to look for talent like they're like a mining company, and that they're going out into, these places and looking for like precious jewels. And so you see these organizations and they're trying to pull like talent from some other organization. So you got Facebook trying to pull somebody from Netflix. And what it does is you end up competing on price, and you create a culture of mercenaries, is that people are going to go where they're going to get paid the most.
Right.
And I think really good organizations, and I'm not implying that those companies are not necessarily, but I think organizations or places that where I would want to be, they, instead of treating it like a mining company, is they approach it like they are farmers, and they realize we are not going to find a great developer, but we have to make a great developer. We have to grow a great developer, and environment and context is everything. And so this is back to Casey, is, we very strongly believe that organizations that invest in junior developers is one of the greatest investments that they can make, not only because it's cost effective, but it also creates a culture of excellence where other great developers want to be, or even more importantly, developers that are going to be great want to be. And so this is where companies that do this right, they don't have to fight for talent, is people understand, like, this is a safe place for me to grow.
Yep.
And all the signaling is right. And it's just this virtuous cycle of creating great developers that create great products that creates great revenue streams that allows you to invest in more developers. And so just purely from a Machiavellian, economic standpoint, like there is no downside to investing in developers and doing it in a sustainable, ethical, responsible ways, because it's amazing to me when you see a technology company that marginalizes and minimizes their engineers, when it's like, this is literally the blood that is pumping through the veins of your company. What are you doing? And it's when you create an environment where people can thrive. So back to psychological safety, creating ownership, creating these right, I think even these right, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation markers, that people naturally will blossom and I think grow and develop into I think the people that, at least when I meet them for the first time, that I really believe they can be. And I'll end on this one thought. The most surprising and pleasant like byproduct of my investment in my apprentices, that I never saw this coming, but I think it's so cool, is they just went out and got their own apprentices, like on their own.
Yeah.
Like they took everything that I taught them and they just started like teaching other people,
Paying it forward.
And that to me is like, it doesn't matter how many books I've written. It doesn't matter, I've been on stage. I remember when I spoke at ng-conf and I did the Mischief Maker with Roger, and I don't know if I've shared this maybe somewhere else, but everything that I could possibly put into a talk went into that talk. It was probably one of the most complex, just technically complex talks that I'd ever given, I think, in the entire conference. And then you have Roger with his amazing vocals, and it just went through the roof. And I remember everybody's clapping, there's people that are standing up. And I remember walking to the edge of the stage, and I hadn't even got to the edge, to the end of the stage. I'm like, I really thought that would have felt better. Like already I could just feel the embers of like that achievement starting to wane. And that for me is when I'm like, I need to find something that is a little bit more permanent that's going to make me happy. And that's when I went all in on the mentorship model. And really, I think that cemented, I think my commitment to mentoring and creating great developers. Is I realized no amount of, I think, attention, personal achievement is going to, I think, fill, I think this hole in my heart. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but this compulsion to achieve something. It's not in myself. Is that, vicariously, it's about, creating systems and environments for people to grow. And there's a lot that goes into that. But I think it comes down to, processes and environment, and even understanding, developing your own identity as an engineer. Of, who are you? And a book I really recommend, is one of my favorite books, is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks about identity-based habits, that when you do something because that's just who you are, those are the habits that are usually effortless and permanent. And an example is, I can't even imagine working on software that didn't involve version control. Like people, they just do it, and now it's the thing, because it's like, it's an engineer, like I use version control. They don't think about it anymore. And imagine if I just write code because that's the kind of programmer I am. And so I think really understanding, or really clarifying your identity as an engineer, and I think as a human being, and really what you stand for and what your core values are. And then ultimately, I would say, in terms of learning Angular, or really anything, is that I think we learn Angular so that ultimately we can transfer that to somebody else, and we can do that exponentially at scale.
Yeah. Wow. So many good things in what you just said. And I'll just say, I think, thank you from everyone who's ever been a junior developer. Thank you for saying that, because it is so true that a company that invests wisely and purposefully in junior developers, I think that needs to happen more. I don't see it happening enough. So thank you for saying that. But so many good things. Like what I'm getting out of, I mean, a lot of things, but one thing is you've got to make content relatable to people. They've got to be able to relate to that. And I love how you break it down into the basics, those fundamentals, the nouns, the verbs, right?
Right.
But being empathetic to your learner and understanding where they're coming from, and that not everybody comes in at the same point, and that you need to be understanding to what they know and understand today, and how you can help them grow from there. Giving people clear and specific learning objectives, I think, is really critical, that you've pointed out there. Giving them meaningful projects and not just saying, here, go read this, or here, go do that.
Right.
And making sure they understand the purpose of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So really, really important. And making things gradual so that they're learning things a little bit every day over time, but that it's not too much all at once. All super important things. So love everything you've said in this episode. I just want to give you an opportunity, if you have any last comments to make, and you don't have to, but if there's any last thoughts that you'd like to leave, this would be the time to do it. You know, one thing that I'm a little curious about is, how does someone find a mentor like Lukas? How does somebody find someone who's willing to work with you and really give you that safe environment? Because I think it's hard to find someone like that.
So I think a really good place to start is, or I would say my experience with the programming community as a whole has been that I think the real true like high performers are incredibly gracious. Like, make no mistake, like anything I've achieved in my career is a result of somebody investing a lot of time into my career, and allowing me to ask 500 questions in a single evening. And so I think that for me, when I see that somebody's serious and that I don't have to babysit them, but that they're committed, and that they're going to, that they have the ability to self-organize. And I will say this, the personality marker that I look for when I'm evaluating, can somebody be a programmer? The technical word is conscientiousness. And so this is an actual, in terms of, psychology and different things, this is a verifiable like quality and a trait. And, but basically what it is it's a high degree of attention to detail and ownership for everything that you do. And kind of a subset of that is, if I was, maybe talking to like a 12-year-old, I might use the word grit. And so like there's a pretty good book by Angela Duckworth on that, called Grit. But when I understand that somebody is taking ownership of the outcome, and they're going to do it regardless of whether or not I help, I am so motivated to make myself as available as I can. And so I would say for somebody on the other end wanting to get into programming, that I think, one, make sure that you've taken ownership of the outcome, and then really think about what that means to actually signal that. And from there, I think starting to interact in a meaningful way within the community. So one, if there's meetups or even virtual events, just start showing up. And even I tell even recruiters who, because there's good recruiters out there, but there's a lot of bad recruiters, is I tell people who are recruiters that, that have confidence, like they're coming from a good place, is I tell them, like, you have to become part of the community. You can't be on the outside looking in. Start going to meetups. And so I think participating in meetups, participating in programming events, I think even if there are like conferences, like some of the best stuff that's ever happened to me is even with ng-conf, like, I just show up and I'm like, I'll do whatever, clean the toilets, I'll fold shirts, whatever you want. And as a result, I've made a lot of amazing friends. Instead of going from being a speaker, I just want to help out, and it's great. And so finding ways to be helpful in a meaningful way. I would say pull requests are, start contributing to software. I'm going to give you a pro tip right now that I have submitted tons of pull requests across the internet, even on like large stuff like AWS or whatever, is by simply saying like maybe a typo in a README. Well, if you're in GitHub and you see that, you can edit the raw, fix the typo, save it, and create a pull request and submit it right there. And so it's not these huge, amazing things that you have to do, that by simply seeing and like, oh, like they spelled this word wrong, or this is confusing. Maybe if they said it this way, and just taking the time, to go and say, this could be better, submit that pull request, and then start to have those conversations. And when you send out those signals, people respond. Like, I think even, like for instance, John Papa, who is, I have so much respect for him and Dan Waleen, and I've had the opportunity to become friends with them. And what I'm so impressed about Dan and John is that they're so wildly talented, and yet I think they're just so genuine and humble and hungry, and they want to learn, and they're so generous with their time. And I go to like ng-conf, and you see John, who's just an absolute total rock star, and he's talking to 400 different people, and he's making time for them. And I think that you will find people that will make time for you. Just make sure that you have an appropriate level of appreciation for just exactly what that means, and you make use of it. And so I would say, meetups, events, pull request. And I will end with this, is that, if you're listening to this and I've said anything that's even, compelling, or, and you want to reach out to me, is I accept DMs on Twitter, and I do try to make myself as available as possible. I like to eat occasionally and sleep. So, I don't have infinite time, but at a minimum, I'm certainly open to like, hey, what's a good book, or what's this or whatever. Is that, I answer hundreds of those questions usually over the course of a week.
Nice.
And so I think there are people such as myself that, are hungry to do that. And I would say as well, is if you've found a mentor and you've benefited from that, not only look at what they've taught you, but look at how they've taught you. And start to consider, and I would say even from an identity standpoint, start to see yourself as a mentor. And then you create that cyclical, fractal, virtuous cycle of somebody taught me, I'm going to teach them, or somebody else. And you're constantly, passing that on. And so if you've been fortunate enough to have a good mentor, I would say, and I would challenge you, like, find a way to be a mentor. And it's amazing so people who go through the 30 by 30, and I hinted at just a second, or like for briefly, is that the very next thing they do when somebody else comes and says, I want to do a 30 by 30, I'll say, great, you're doing the 30 by 30. And the person who just finished it, they're the mentor.
Nice.
And so they learn so much more mentoring somebody through this 30 by 30. But a lot of times than doing it themselves the first time. And so that's that self-reinforcing thing, is that if you're at a level 1 and you're going to a level 2, this is how, when I had an agency, this is how I baked it in, is that if you're going to a level 2, you have to mentor somebody to fill the spot that you're vacating. And that creates this really interesting dynamic of, you really have to know what you know, because you got to teach somebody else how to do it. And it's just this flywheel of momentum that once you build it, it's a really special thing to see.
Oh yeah, totally. And when you can explain it to someone else, it makes you go back and relearn things that maybe you weren't going to retain otherwise. But so good. again, thank you so much for coming on here. I will just give a quick shameless plug because you were saying to get involved. And that is something I'm the director of the Angular community meetup. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in it's online, totally free, do it. Come and help. You can find us at angularcommunity.net. You can find me on Twitter at Jedi Bravery. Message me, let me know you're interested in participating, and we'll definitely make room for you there. But great advice again. If you do want to reach out to Lukas, which, hey, he just gave you an offer, I would highly suggest taking it. You can find him on Twitter and I love this name, it's Simpleton. So just Simpulton. Be sure to send him your questions, get to know him. He's very kind. And then I'll put some links into the description of this video that are for Lukas's courses on Pluralsight, Front-End Masters, and also the link to his book on Amazon. So thank you so much, Lukas.
Yep. Thank you.